And I just want to be a good mother for my child. I want to be everything my mother wasn't.
What's going on, everyone? Welcome to Behavioral Arts. My name is Spidey and I use my degree in sociology and psychology, my certifications in criminal interrogation and body language analysis, and over 10 years experience as an award-winning mentalist to teach people behavioral analysis and practical psychology on stages and television shows all over the world. The internet went wild this week as Gypsy Rose Blanchard announced that she is pregnant. Her and her partner Ken Urker are expecting their first child, and she announced the news in a YouTube video that had a lot of emotional highs and lows. But what do her body language, facial expressions, and word choice reveal? And most importantly, what is it about her story that's not quite adding up to a lot of commenters? Now, before we look at this footage, let's really quickly talk about who Gypsy Rose Blanchard is for those of you who are not familiar with the story. Gypsy Rose was raised by her mother, Claudine or Didi Blanchard, who experts believe suffered from the mental disorder Munchausen by proxy. And as a result, she faked and even caused a long list of illnesses for Gypsy Rose. She spent most of her childhood in a wheelchair eating through tubes because her mother had her and the community convinced that she suffered from a long list of illnesses, including muscular dystrophy, leukemia, a whole bunch of allergies, and the list goes on and on. In June of 2015, Gypsy Rose planned the murder of her mother and convinced her boyfriend at the time, Nick Goat John, to execute it. They were both tried for the murder, and she served 8 years and he is currently serving a life sentence. While in prison, Gypsy Rose ended up in a relationship with a man who wrote her a letter of support. His name was Ken Urker, but that relationship did not work out. She went on to meet, fall in love with, and marry another man by the name of Ryan Anderson. And she stayed married to him until she was released. A few months after, March of this year, so 4 months ago, her and Ryan broke up. Soon after, she went back to dating Ken and now has announced that she is pregnant with Ken's baby. Now, before we look at this video and the really interesting behaviors within, there's a really quick message I want to say, especially to viewers who are new to this channel. 0% of this video is about Gypsy's character, whether Gypsy is a good person or a bad person. You can decide that for yourself, and there are tons of places online where you can go talk about that. My experience is strictly in behavior, to look at the behaviors that we're seeing, both verbally and non-verbally, to try to figure out what's going on, what's being hidden, what's causing certain emotions and thoughts. That's it.
Hi everybody. So I know the rumors have been flying around for quite some time now, and I'm happy to announce that I am 11 weeks pregnant. Ken and I are expecting our very first child come January of 2025. We're both very excited. This was not planned at all. It was completely unexpected, but we're both very excited to take on this new journey of parenthood. I have already experienced the symptoms. When I first learned that I was pregnant, the first thing that I noticed was the cravings. So I craved orange juice. Orange juice was not something that I craved on a daily basis before. So when I started craving orange juice, I'm like, okay, well, guess I just want orange juice. I didn't think anything of it. And so that was one thing. And then the next thing that I noticed was the hunger, an insatiable hunger to just eat everything. So I really went on a binge and just started eating everything. And then, of course, I missed my period, and I didn't think anything of it because I had seen my OBGYN and I had tested my fertility, and she's like, we're probably gonna have to put you on fertility meds, or at least something to make you ovulate because you're not ovulating on a regular. So I'm like, okay. So I had that appointment was a month out. And so when I missed my period, I thought I was just having issues with ovulation. And it wasn't until I had texted with Ken and he's like, have you taken a pregnancy test? And I'm like, nah, I don't think I'm pregnant. I don't think it's that.
Okay, so just in that first clip, there is a ton to talk about. Verbally, non-verbally, there's lots. So let's start with establishing a bit of a baseline to see how she normally communicates. So she's quite animated when she speaks. Her tone fluctuates, goes up and down quite a bit, and we do see quite a bit of illustrators. Illustrators is the word the research uses to denote gestures that we use to accentuate what we're saying, to help us get the message across. With the hands, with the face, and with her, there's a lot. Her face moves quite a bit, her eyebrows go up and down, a lot of smiles, head tilts, but her hands as well. As she talks, her hands are palm up and they go out like this, and she'll gesture and they'll come back to the middle like this a little bit, then gesture and come back to the middle. So she's quite animated. This is something that interrogators and interviewers like to see, because when you have someone like this in front of you who's very animated, this is them in their natural relaxed state. But as a stressful topic enters their mind or something is making them nervous, we start to see those movements slow down a little bit for a couple of reasons. First, when we're stressed, we like to draw less attention to ourselves. But second, when what we call the cognitive load is increased, we're so focused on what we're saying that we tend to move less as well. And look for those behavioral shifts. Even with her, you're gonna see it. It's gonna be obvious. I won't even have to point it out to you. There's another behavior here that's very consistent in her baseline, and such a great example of how having a little bit of background information on someone you're communicating with or interviewing can really, really help. So in her case, we already saw it a couple of times, but we're gonna see it a lot more moving forward. She very often licks her lips, and we very often hear clicking sounds between her words, or even with the lip licks. Now, normally I would tell you that if this isn't part of someone's baseline and all of a sudden you start seeing these things, it could be because stress is spiking, because as we get stressed, our mouth dries out. That's normal. However, in the case of Gypsy Rose, one of the many things her mother put her through was the removal of some of her salivary glands, because apparently she was drooling excessively. So they had some of those glands removed, and as a result, she naturally produces less saliva than most people. So whereas in a lot of cases that's something I might pay attention to, in her case, having dry mouth is literally part of her baseline, so it's not as important. As she's about to announce the news, she says, there have been some rumors flying around, and she builds that drama. I'm happy to announce, and as she says, I'm happy to announce, we see this downwards bounce with this little bit of a wiggle like this, and we see the arms wiggle as well as she goes into that. What's really interesting about that gesture is we saw it right in the beginning of the video, almost the exact same way. As she said, hi everybody, we saw that exact same gesture, downwards bounce with that wiggle that we saw in the arms as well. And I think this is her releasing nervous energy as she goes into something. Almost like a here we go. You ever see someone before they run or before they fight, this kind of bouncing, this jiggle, kind of just to release that energy before you start something? I think it's the exact same thing for her. What makes this a really confident tell for me is that dragged out and we build the tension, release the tension as we go into the news. Here we go.
And I'm happy to announce that.
And as she announces the news, it's really interesting to see where she puts the emphasis. So it's not like she's saying, and I'm happy to announce that I'm 11 weeks pregnant. It's not this big pregnant. There is some emphasis on the pregnant, but there's also some emphasis on the am. I am 11 weeks pregnant, and she emphasizes both.
I'm happy to announce that I am 11 weeks pregnant.
The words that we emphasize in the way that we speak can really show our hand in showing which part of the sentence we're putting the emphasis or the surprise on, which element was surprising. So in that sentence, as she said it, if I were to say, I have some news, guys, I am 11 weeks pregnant, that would mean that the surprise is that it's me. Other people have been pregnant, but I'm pregnant. That's where the surprise is. So in the way that she said it, we saw the emphasis on the am and the pregnant. And here's how she emphasizes. We see the eyebrow flash. So the eyebrows go up like this. Now she's someone who talks with her eyebrows quite a bit, but there are moments where we see them really go up as she emphasizes something and it matches her tone. And this is very common. There's a lot of research that shows that everywhere in the world, we emphasize important things with the eyebrow flash. At the very same time as her tone and eyebrows are going up, very often she tilts her head as she's emphasizing. That's very common, and she did it both with am and with pregnant.
That I am 11 weeks pregnant.
Now, head tilting is something we quite often see in sympathetic exchanges. Like if somebody says something that gets our sympathy, we might go, aw, and we tilt our heads because it's a very vulnerable position. We're exposing the neck, and it's a nonverbal way of saying there's no threat here. I connect with this. It's also something we often see in a request for sympathy or a request for social connection. So we often see, even in cartoons, someone might have this little cutesy pose like this where the shoulders come together, and the head's tilted a little bit, and they might look down like this and look up at you. And it's almost this attempt to look kind of small and vulnerable to kind of get you to connect with them, to kind of give them that sympathy. So with her, it's quite common that she'll emphasize the big news like this, like, please don't attack me, don't take this as bad news. And given what she's gone through, it makes a ton of sense, right? There are a lot of critics online. She's gone through a very difficult past. So it makes sense that she has these moments of like, okay, don't jump on this. I just want to tell you this is good news. So it makes a lot of sense that she emphasizes that way. Now, why am I saying that it's important to note that she's emphasizing the am as much as the pregnant? It's because the am is a confirmation. She started off by saying that there have been some rumors circulating. So it's a thumbs up, a congratulations to those who guessed it, those who got it. There's a huge social element to the way she's saying that. I am pregnant. Good job, everyone. You guys got it. Create that social connection. Again, we're going to see a lot more examples of that.
I'm happy to announce that I am 11 weeks pregnant.
Then she says that it was not planned at all, it was completely unexpected. And her tone and her gestures are a little over the top, but this is just a quick statement that she's making. I don't have the chance to sit with her and ask her about that, ask her about the process and see if there's any part of it that's making her stressed. It's a statement that she's presenting as she planned to present it. So it's really hard to find anything in a moment like that. But as we go on with the story, let's see if that information matches up with some other things that she's saying. Then she says, I've already experienced, and we see the hand come up to the face like this, which is something we often see in stressful moments, right? You might see someone rub their forehead or their eyebrows or their temples like this, or just like this on the face. It's self-soothing. It helps calm us down for a moment. And her eyes close as well, which is called an eye block. And we often see this in moments of negativity as well. Like, I don't want to face this thing. Like if you get bad news, you might just close your eyes like this because you don't want to deal with it. So we see that. Then a giggle and a sigh. I've experienced the symptoms. So there's a lot being put on this symptoms thing. And this does feel quite dramatized. Now, let's not forget that over the course of the last few years, she spent a lot of time on documentaries and non-scripted television. And this is a field that I have a lot of experience in because I spent a major part of my career on non-scripted television. And although a lot of the time it's not scripted, it's very much directed, especially when there's drama, when there's a story that has to be told a certain way. You have producers there who help you tell it a certain way. Like, no, take that again, but build the drama here. Or make this more suspenseful, get us that commercial break. And they have a way to get you to tell things in a compelling way. And this feels a lot like that. There are a lot of moments in this video where we see these gestures as a way of saying something that's really meant to pull us in, like, oh, what are these symptoms? What are these big symptoms? But just remember this. Remember that there's this big emphasis being put on the symptoms, these big symptoms, because this is going to come back up. So just remember it. Then comes the part that I found really, really confusing and inconsistent. And if this was in an interview, I would have a lot of questions about this, because interrogators and interviewers pay a lot of attention to timeline, the sequence of events. And when something doesn't add up, it's a clue that we need to go in there and try to figure out, okay, what happened then? But then what happened before that? And in this case, there's a major timeline issue. She starts off by saying, when I first learned that I was pregnant, the first thing I noticed was the cravings. I was craving orange juice, which is something that I didn't crave before.
When I first learned that I was pregnant, the first thing that I noticed was the cravings. So I craved orange juice.
She even says that orange juice isn't something she normally craved. So when she started craving it, she thought to herself, okay, I guess I just want orange juice. And she does that same kind of drop and wiggle that usually for her is like the beginning of something, like here we go. So to me, part of this felt like she's saying when she first found out she's pregnant, which she literally says, the first thing she remembers is the cravings, like the orange juice. And that, here we go, here come the cravings. But then she says, I didn't think much of it. And it almost seems like there's this mood of she didn't piece it together. But piece what together? You're literally saying that it's the first thing you noticed after you found out you were pregnant. So that was a little confusing already in and of itself.
Guess I just want orange juice. I didn't think anything of it. And so...
Then she says that she ate everything in sight. Then she goes into the whole, she missed her period, but she didn't think anything of it.
Of course, I missed my period. And I didn't think anything of it because I had seen my OBGYN. That appointment was like a month out. And so when I missed my period, I thought I was just having issues with ovulation. And it wasn't until I had texted with Ken and he's like, have you taken a pregnancy test? And I'm like, nah, I don't think it's I don't think I'm pregnant. I don't think it's that.
But this whole sequence began with her saying, when I found out I was pregnant, the first thing I remember was the cravings. So now it's like, okay, you knew you were pregnant. That's where we started the story. Now you've gone back to before you were pregnant because you missed your period, but you didn't connect the dots and you didn't know you were pregnant. The only reason I could find for this sequence making sense, and you guys let me know in the comments if this makes sense at all, is in the beginning when she says, when I first found out I was pregnant, it's not the first part of the sentence of her saying the first thing I remember is the cravings. It's almost a title of this segment because first of all, again, because in documentaries, they often make you repeat the question before you start, just for continuity and because it makes more sense for the editors later. But also, she does talk like this at times. There are times where she'll say a thought and then she'll elaborate on that thought. So is there a chance she's saying, when I first found out I was pregnant, dot, underline, go to the next line. The first thing I remember was the cravings. I craved orange juice, didn't make much of it. Then I ate everything. Then I missed my period. So I thought, so it's like the title, then she's elaborating. I'll be honest, it doesn't sound like that at all. She's saying, when I first found out I was pregnant, the first thing that I noticed, like her tone goes up and she continues with that thought.
When I first learned that I was pregnant, the first thing that I noticed was the cravings. So I craved orange juice.
So it doesn't sound like that, but I'm just trying to make sense of this timeline. So let me know, could it be that it's a separate thought? It's just communicated in a very confusing way. The other thing that was really noteworthy in the verbal communication here was that she said that the reason she didn't think much of her missed period is because she had gone to see her OBGYN to be tested for fertility and that she was told that there are some issues with her fertility, so she needs to take meds in order to ovulate. Now, I'm by no means an expert on this subject, and I know that a lot of women will go to the OBGYN when there is irregularities in their period because it can indicate something else. So they might do certain things to get the right hormones or to regulate that for health reasons. But the language here, ovulate, fertility. I happen to be at a phase in my life where a lot of people around me right now are trying to get pregnant, start that journey. So it's language that I'm hearing a lot around me right now. And this is the kind of language. She's not saying that the OBGYN talked about her hormones or her health. It's specifically that she went for a fertility test and she was told she needs fertility meds to ovulate. So there's this language suggesting that there was talks about her ovulating and fertility. So when we go back earlier and think about how she said that this was a complete surprise, it wasn't planned at all, I'm having a bit of a hard time accepting those two things. At the very least, there were conversations with the OBGYN about fertility, about ovulating. There was a certain conversation around this. So I don't think it was a massive surprise that they weren't planning at all. So there's a discrepancy there and there are a few more coming up, but I think that there's a very, very good reason for this discrepancy that we'll discuss once you've seen a little bit more of the interview. But before we look at all of that, do me a huge favor, hit that subscribe button, turn those notifications on for more behavioral analysis and practical psychology content.
And it wasn't until I had texted with Ken and he's like, have you taken a pregnancy test? And I'm like, no, I don't think I'm pregnant. I don't think it's that. And then I had taken a test and it turned out positive. And so everything just made sense. But my pregnancy journey so far. So I have experienced crazy mood swings. Like, poor Ken. If he breathes wrong, I am just like, pregnancy is not easy with the mood swings.
All right, for this segment, I want to hear in the comments from a very specific demographic. I want to hear from anyone who's ever been blindsided by a pregnancy, whether it's yourself or you have a friend or a family member who completely unexpectedly somebody got pregnant. And let us know in the comments when that story was told, how much emphasis there was on the finding out that they were pregnant, that positive test. Because in my experience, when people tell a story of pregnancy, whether they were planning it or not, but infinitely more when it was a surprise, there's a lot of emphasis on that experience of seeing that positive test, right? There's a big build up to where, this was happening, I was late, I wasn't sure, and then we decided to test, and I saw the test, it was positive. I couldn't believe it. And I called my husband, he was at work, and all this kind of stuff. Now, I'm not saying everyone tells a story the same way. Of course, different people tell stories different ways. But for someone like her, who's very dramatized, like I already experienced these symptoms, and oh, poor Ken, poor Ken. So a lot of this dramatization, what a strange place for us to get almost no emotion. Because even earlier when she said it was a huge surprise, we didn't expect it, and now when it comes to the point where she was surprised by it, this is the surprise, we're getting almost nothing. I just find that really interesting, that discrepancy.
And I'm like, nah, I don't think I'm pregnant. I don't think it's that. And then I had taken a test and it turned out positive. And so everything just made sense.
Then she does something that I was trying to talk about earlier. She says, my pregnancy journey so far. And she goes, so I've been experiencing, and she starts telling her story. So I was saying earlier that sometimes she says this little title and then builds on that. My pregnancy journey so far. Now, that's what I'm going to talk about now. And I kind of was thinking earlier that it was the same thing when she was talking about when I first found out I was pregnant, but here it's very clear. My pregnancy journey so far, pause. So I started experiencing, no. There's a clear disconnect.
My pregnancy journey so far. So I have experienced crazy mood swings.
In that first one, it flowed. When I first learned that I was pregnant, the first thing I noticed was the cravings. It has more flow, and it starts with when I first found out that I was pregnant. So that's not really a title. Here, it's almost very clearly a title. My pregnancy so far, pause. And now we go. The structure and the flow of the sentence is significantly different. So yeah, I'm still extremely confused by the chronology of that first orange juice thing that she talked about. So now we elaborate on those symptoms from earlier, the big symptoms. And it turns out they are crazy mood swings, like poor Ken, poor Ken. So twice poor Ken with what we call stop gestures on both hands. So pretty much everywhere in the world, when the fingers extend with the palm outwards, it's a negation or an attempt to stop something, to get someone's attention. Even in a greeting, we're trying to get their attention. So we have two hands doing this. Before the first poor Ken, we see an eye block. She closes her eyes. And remember, eye block is to keep a thought in or keep a thought out. But we also see it in moments of intense emphasis, like to emphasize something intense, whether it's positive or negative. So poor Ken, and then her eyes roll upwards. Poor Ken, like rolling her eyes, familiar irritation. So poor Ken the second time. Then she says that if he so much as breathes wrong, she's like, and notice how there's no specificity there. She doesn't say what that is. So do you swear at him? Do you call him names? Is it playful? We don't really know. And I feel a part of the reason she speaks this way is because she knows she has a lot of critics out there. And if she gives specifics, they might say, oh, I can't believe she would say that. Why would you say that? So just non-specific. She's keeping it more about the mood swing, not the specifics of what she says to him. Then she does something that I recognize very much. After the she laughs, and we see something that we call taffy eyes or pulling taffy eyes. So basically, if I were to say something that I think is funny, I might say something and just start laughing, right? But as she starts laughing and her head turns away, notice how her eyes stay on the camera just a moment longer. And this is something that falls under the confirmation glance category, and it happens from people who want to know how their delivery is being received. Now, I don't know if there's a person behind her camera, but it doesn't matter because we tend to humanize cameras and behave with them the way we would with a person. So what's happening here is that she said something, how she is with Ken, and as she's laughing, instead of just pulling away and laughing about it, for a moment her eyes stay on where her imaginary audience would be to kind of see how this is being received. Because again, there's this moment of her saying like, I'm a total nightmare, but it's just a joke, it's just a joke. And you see that a lot in people who say something and they kind of giggle nervously and they kind of look around to see, okay, is it being well received? And it looks exactly like that. The reason it's called taffy eyes is because instead of laughing and just breaking away, the person their whole energy turns away, but the eyes are kind of like stuck and then take a little bit more time to be pulled away from the audience. And we see this a lot with people who are used to being criticized or getting negative attention because they just want to make sure, okay, everyone's okay, I'm just joking. And again, it's very recognizable and makes perfect sense right there.
So far, pregnancy has been a breeze as far as symptoms. I find like the tiredness is starting to wear off a little bit. That was like the biggest symptom that I had saw with me is that I'm always tired and sleepy. So that's been one thing that I've been dealing with. The rest is completely manageable. Like I said, Ken has been very forgiving to my symptoms. But the rest has been a breeze.
Okay, wow. So again, there's some inconsistencies and things that don't go with previous statements. So she literally starts this clip by saying that it's been a breeze so far as symptoms go. But literally, like not 5 minutes before this, she was like, I've already experienced the symptoms. And she made this big deal about all these symptoms. And just before this, she said that the crazy mood swings, poor Ken, but now the symptoms have been a breeze. And it kind of seems like, well, fine, if it's been a breeze, why earlier did you put this huge emphasis on, oh my God, I've been experiencing these crazy symptoms, and now it turns out that they've just been a breeze. And the biggest one is the tiredness that she dealt with, although she just said that there's been these massive mood swings, poor Ken. So that's kind of weird how all of a sudden it's a breeze. Then she says that the tiredness is the one thing she's had to deal with, and the rest is completely manageable. And we see a bunch of things. She shifts her posture as she does a grooming gesture. She adjusts the bottom of her dress. And grooming is typically something we do to fix our appearance, and it usually signals that our attention is turning inwards. We're a little more self-conscious. Now, grooming gestures alone don't mean much because it could just be a moment of self-awareness. Make sure you look good for the camera, and that's it. But this isn't alone. There's a quick look at the camera. As she's shifting, we see the grooming gesture, and then her arms come together quite close and tight like this, protecting an area that women tend to get very protective of, especially pregnant women, which is the reproductive or vital organs. Now, I often talk about how if you see someone sitting in a room like this with their arms crossed in front of them, whether it's up here or down there, it's not that big a deal. Maybe they're just comfortable that way. We're not looking for stagnant gestures. We're looking for a shift. This is someone who's very animated, always talking with their hands. Yes, they come together in a lot of moments, but now they're really together and they really seem to be protective in a position that we see in moments of vulnerability or self-awareness. And it's happening with this grooming. It's happening with this hesitation that we're feeling, this slowing down of her pace. And right at the end of that, very quickly, we see her eyes open up as her eyebrows shoot up, almost in a very quick eye roll, like this. There's this thing that she's thinking of. And I thought when I saw that the thing she's thinking of is whatever other symptoms there are, right? Because she's saying, you know, that's been really the main one, and the rest have been manageable. And we're seeing this moment of self-awareness at the very least.
The rest is completely manageable.
So in my head, I was like, yeah, she's for sure talking about those other symptoms that earlier were such a big deal, and poor Ken. And then she confirms that. Because what does she say immediately after? She says, you know, like I said, Ken has been very forgiving with my symptoms.
Like I said, Ken has been very forgiving to my symptoms.
What symptoms is he forgiving of? Because if we isolate everything else, here she said she's tired and everything else is manageable. So what is he forgiving? Your tiredness? That's what he's been forgiving with? So it's kind of bizarre how we went from, oh, the symptoms. I've been experiencing these symptoms to poor Ken, you know, he breathes wrong and I'm on his case. Now we're going to the tiredness is really the only thing. The rest has been very manageable, but Ken has been forgiving of the symptoms that are manageable. It's very strange. Let me tell you what I think is happening here. And this is something that I've seen a lot with people who are on social media. When you're on social media, especially someone like her, who is getting tons of criticism from all kinds of places for different things, you try to say things that will connect to different people. And this is someone who has not known normalcy in her life. At no point in her life has she led a normal life. And right now, we could see with the way that she's fixing herself up, the way that she's communicating, the way that she cares about that audience, and we're gonna see a lot more signs of this, she's really trying to grab on to any sense of normalcy. So in the way that she's telling this story, she just wants to connect. She just wants to say that I'm just another pregnant lady just like anybody else, and she just wants those relatable stories. So I think this is the reason that because her priority isn't necessarily reflecting the reality here, but just connecting through her story, we're getting elements that don't match up, right? Because, oh, the symptoms, you know, the symptoms of pregnancy, that gets me to connect. But, you know, Ken's been so forgiving, but really it's been fine except for the tiredness. So it's just these different attempts to connect that don't necessarily check out with the mood of every other thing she set up until that point. She just wants normalcy in her life. What this really reminds me of is something you'll often see in groups of people, but very often in like high school, in like groups of teenagers, where there's someone who doesn't quite fit in, or they're, a little bit outcast, and there's a group of people discussing something, and maybe they're saying like, oh my God, my parents have been on my case. And they'll just be like, oh yeah, totally, yeah, me too, my parents have totally been on my case. It's just a way to relate, just something you say to try to connect with people, because this is what you're supposed to do. You're supposed to have the mood swings, and you're supposed to have the symptoms. Oh my God, I'm always on his case. I just feel like it's one of those things for her to go like, see, I'm just like everyone else.
It's an amazing feeling when your whole world shifts. And suddenly it's not about you. It's not about anything other than the tiny little life that's inside you that you are now in charge of protecting. And that little tiny life is a baby, a little tiny human that's yours, and that you have to make sure that you protect, you love, you take care of, and all of the things that I wished I could have had when I was little. Here I am getting emotional, guys, sorry. All the things that I wanted in a mother, I want to give to this baby. Knowing that I am a mother now. And I'm happy. And I just want to be a good mother for my child. I want to be everything my mother wasn't.
Okay, so I want to start off by saying that there is a vast difference between fake and dramatized. And in that regard, I don't believe that this is entirely fake, but I do believe that it is dramatized. And the best example I could think of for that was, I was watching this video and I thought about how at some point in my show, there was a story that I would tell. In my stand-up performance on stage, there's a story that I would tell from my actual life that actually makes me very sad. And every time I told it and performed the piece that goes with it, I got sad. And almost every time I actually teared up. None of it was fake. The emotion was real. That actually happened. I felt that way, but it was a choice to put it on that stage. It was a choice to script it and decide to present it. And we see that a lot in a lot of different performances, these emotional moments. So it's possible for this to be a performance, a scripted message, but for it to contain real emotion in there coming out. And I think that's what we're seeing. So here are some moments where we are seeing real emotion. First of all, her entire body language midway through this thing changes. Her tone drops, everything closes in. So it's not just the crying or the sadness or any of that, it's her entire body language, demeanor, and tone. She went from up here with a high pitch to down here and talking in this lower place like this. Everything is closed up. But when we look at the moment where she starts crying, the first thing we notice is that the moment the emotion hits, she does look down. And this is a reflex that we have when real sadness hits. When sadness hits, one of the things that we want to do is hide it. We might turn away, we might look down, we might block our face, we might curl our lips, take a deep breath of air in, close the eyes. We have all these mechanisms to try to hide it, to not display it. Around that moment, we also start to see what's supposed to happen with the eyebrows when you're sad. Now, this is a really beautiful thing because it's very difficult to fake when you're not sad. So when we're sad, there's a whole bunch of stuff that happens, and this is universal. The research has shown it's the same everywhere in the world, and one of those things is the inner corners of the eyebrows curl up and come close together like this. Now, the reason I have to have my fingers here is because it's really hard to fake this. We could all bring our eyebrows in like this and even raise them, but typically when we're trying to fake it, the whole eyebrow goes up. In sadness, it's only this middle part that goes up. Some people have the ability to fake this, but it's very rare. And I'm sure some of you are trying right now and you're gonna say, oh, I could totally do it. Awesome, but not everybody can. And not everybody knows to. So in that moment, now, granted, it's not huge. We're not seeing this big thing, but we're definitely seeing, you can see it in those inner corners, that they're coming close together and they're a little bit raised. They're going up like this at the inner corner. It's not huge, but it's certainly there. While she's looking down, her voice is cracking and we see some tears. Now, the reason I say it's dramatized is because throughout this emotion, we're getting a lot about how She wants something better than she had growing up. And she knows this is going to connect. She knows that we know how difficult she had it. Of course we know how difficult she had it. Of course we all hope that this baby will have a much better life than her. We hope every baby out there will have a better childhood than the one that she had. So she knows that's a soft spot that she could connect with. So although it's real and there's real emotion there, we're really getting a lot about this whole giving this baby a better life. It's a big part of this message. We also see her wipe that tear and look at it to put a little bit of focus on that. So we are seeing her lean into this real emotion. At the end, she says, "I want to be everything my mother wasn't," as she quickly looks to the camera, then up, and her hands go up like this in a quick, like they open up upwards in a quick pop like this. And this is a hand shrug. So quite often when we shrug, the shoulders are involved and the mouth or the eyebrows might be involved, but sometimes it's just the hands. And often when we see just the hands like this, even with the shoulders like this quick kind of pop, it's often, I don't know, no. Kind of like, I don't know what to tell you. I don't know what else to add to that. I don't know what else to say. And we really get that feeling there. Right at the end of the sentence, it's like this, I don't know. That's all I got. That's the end.
And as unconventional as this relationship and this child may have came from, I couldn't be happier. And this is a blessing. I found my freedom in a way that I never expected. And I'm okay with that. Everything that has ever happened to me in my life suddenly doesn't matter. Because it all led me to be who I am today. And it all led me to this moment right here, right now. And that's a blessing. To say that I made it. That's a success story.
I wanted to end with that clip for two very important reasons. The first one is that different viewers will see something different while watching this clip. Those who really connect with her story and what she went through and the fact that she overcame all that to find some kind of life she's happy with will really connect with this as a powerful, positive moment. Others will look at the way she communicates, which is at places a little over dramatized, taking those pauses and those big gestures. And I bet a lot of that comes from being directed on documentaries to lean into emotions more. And she's bringing it this video. A lot of people will focus on that and feel like it's just this big dramatic thing she's doing to get the views, to get the attention. But here's the thing about that. Both those things can coexist. And this is a huge thing I've seen about Gypsy Rose. She's one of those topics that really seems to create completely polarized thinking, because I'll see people say something like, "Oh my God, poor her, she had such a tough childhood. I'm so glad she's doing okay. It's great to see that she's working through that." And someone else will come in and go, no, she's deceptive and she just wants attention and this and that, as a counter to that statement. But both of those things can be true at the same time. We live in a world where people don't understand that if you say something good about a person, it doesn't mean you're saying that everything about the person is good. You're allowed to see good in people that you dislike. You're allowed to see bad in people that you like. So it's totally fine to acknowledge that she's had a tough life and she's doing better and she's trying to work on herself. But there are certain behaviors that she's had, or certain ways that she behaves, or certain things that she does that I don't like, that I'm not a fan of, or I think is a little put on or dramatized. It's totally fine to think both those things. But the main reason I wanted to talk about this clip is because what she says right at the end, forget body language. I think she lays her cards on the table completely open, because she ends with saying, "And it led me to this moment right here, right now. It's a blessing to say that I made it. That's a success story." So she's talking about the baby like it's the conclusion of her story. Like this is where her story goes. And it's got this vibe that this is her sticking it to her mom and saying, "You tried to mess me up to where I couldn't be normal, but look at me here now. I have all the symptoms of pregnancy and I made it. I made it to this moment right now, and this is a success story." And there are some concerns with this way of thinking. It puts a lot of pressure on this moment, on this baby. Let's remember that she's representing this as this typical relationship. I'm nagging him and we have all the troubles, but he's been, super understanding with my symptoms and all these things. But let's remember that a couple of months ago, she was married to another guy. She's still not divorced from that guy. She's still technically married. She went into this relationship and now she's pregnant with this guy. And in the documentaries, she was talking about that other guy like that one, Ryan, was her savior, you know, this big romance, this big happy ending, which is what she's looking for. She's chasing that happy ending. She thought she had it with Ryan. It didn't work out. She rushed towards a new story, a new happy ending. And now it's like, now this is my happy ending. But again, a lot of this stuff is volatile. Ryan even said that shortly after she got out of jail, they went shopping together and she was looking at baby clothes. Maybe it wasn't super serious, like a super serious plan, but at the very least, there was this idea, this end goal in her mind to be with a man, to have a baby, to have that normal life, to really just prove to the world that she was able to gain normalcy. And that's why I think we're seeing these behaviors in this video. The way she's telling this story in a dramatic way that she thinks is how she'll connect with the audience, or how something she says here is a very different mood or vibe from the way she says the same thing elsewhere, because she's just trying to connect somehow with some sense of like, oh, I'm going through all the normal things of pregnancy and this and that, and oh, that old chestnut, and just wants to tell the story in a normal way. I think that's her pursuit, and she sees this as the way to get that, to prove that. So this is just a quick clip that I had to film because I realized while I was editing that there was something in my notes that I never said in the original video, so now I'm filming it and throwing it in. But a big part of the reason I feel that she exaggerated how unplanned this was is because just a few short weeks ago, she was married to Ryan, and a lot of fans were invested in their love story. It was featured in a lot of documentaries, it was all over social media, and a lot of fans thought that this was her happily ever after. This was her finally getting a piece of happiness. So I feel like a lot of her fans would feel a little let down to know that the moment that didn't work out, she went right back to her ex, and very quickly now they're expecting a child, and this is what she wanted. This was her plan. So by representing this as completely unplanned, it kind of lets them down a little less. It doesn't seem as much like the moment that one didn't work out, she went towards this completely new happily ever after. But there is a ton going on in this video, and I really had to pick and choose the topics that I was going to cover because there's so much to talk about, and I can't wait to read your comments to see what you guys thought about all this. And let's try to remember to stay compassionate because the situation may be extreme, but our opinions don't have to be. So let me know what you think about all this in the comments, and I will see you on the next one.